Chapter 21 Jump. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Ack. An involuntary moan escaped from Matthew's lips. The dull thud of his body crashing into the concrete wall of the building didn't bode well. But the metallic crack that followed and the cold feeling underneath Matt's fingers announced the important thing. "I did it," Matthew whispered, fighting off the momentary pain caused by crashing into the wall. He then took several deep breaths to calm himself down. "Well, then, let's not waste any time," Matt thought, dropping himself as low as he could before taking a look down. Damn it, Matthew cursed when he realized the one mistake he didn't account for. Even stretched out as far as he possibly could, his foot still dangled a few inches away from the window's frame. "If I just drop, I will likely slip," Matthew thought, biting down his lips. There was only so long that he could spend theorizing while hanging down from the half-dot pipe. There was no telling when the bolts holding it in place would give up. What was even worse, though, was that Matthew wasn't athletic enough to keep on hanging like that. Is there anything, he thought, desperately looking around to find a spot easier for him to descend. And there it was, near the middle point of the building length. A drain pipe ran down the entire height of the building. The problem was that Matthew was near the center point of the entire compound, not in the middle of the wing. "I don't have much choice, I guess," Matthew muttered under his nose as he came to a decision. Creak. The pipe let out a long, wailing cry, signifying that it was under a lot of stress. Hardly any drain pipe was designed to support the weight of a human, after all. "Please, just hold on for a moment," Matthew begged in his thoughts, slowly moving his body sideways through the outer wall of the school. And below him, there was nothing. Only a long distance to the ground, and then hard and unwelcoming earth, that was currently brimming with zombies to boot. "It's better not to fall, I guess," Matthew thought, trying to make some light of the situation. Because in the position he was in right now, he could only try to scam himself into thinking positively, as there wasn't a single thing that could make Matt feel optimistic. Bit by bit, Matthew moved across the wall. He only managed to reach half of his way before the occasional noises made by the drainpipe turned constant. "It's not going to last for much longer," Matthew thought, hurrying his movements up. Sadly, he wasn't athletic at all. Sure, the system would help him grow faster than anyone without it, but he has yet to start growing properly. Damn, Matthew tightened his lips, turning them into a thin line. "Normally, I don't think I would be able to make it," he thought while keeping his hands moving. And then, a bolt came loose. One of the supports on which the half-dot pipe was held to the wall came off. "L.rg fuck," Matthew cursed under his breath as he hurried his hands. But it wasn't a simple task either, as his exhaustion started to get into Matthew's muscles. Another bolt came loose, causing the entire pipe to wiggle threateningly. It used to be stable support for Matthew's hands, but now it was slowly becoming a challenge just to keep on holding to it. "Hurry!" Matthew screamed in his thoughts, desperately moving his hands sideways. He reached out for the vertical pipe. The third bolt came loose. The horizontal line that Matthew hung down from suddenly broke, causing the part with Matthew to swing away from the wall and then down. It was only moments away from breaking off completely. "Hell!" Matthew screamed out in his mind, terrified beyond any measure. Yet, before panic could take over his body, he just happened to look forward, right towards the window he wanted to reach. Ha! Matthew froze for a moment when he saw more than he expected to in the reflection on the glass. The pipe cracked again, another bolt coming loose. The entire thing fell down even further, quickly threatening to go below the level of the window Matthew wanted to climb. Now. Matthew forced himself to swing forward, despite how this would clearly compromise the structural integrity of the pipe. But right now, he was simply too far from the window to reach it. Matthew swung his legs forward, bending the pipe even further as he got closer to the window. Then, the last of the bolts that kept the pipe attached to the wall gave up. Matthew let go of the metal piece since it no longer provided him with any help. He was falling. There was no denying it. Matt's swing gave him some forward momentum, but it was nowhere close to the gravitational pull of the planet. "Fuck!" Matt screamed out when his hands struck the frame of the window, sliding past the glass only to end up crashing at the sill. No, no, no. Matt milled with his hands, desperately attempting to grasp at something. But no matter how hard he tried, his hands continued to slide down the metal of the window still. And then, the fingers of Matthew's right hand hooked against something, giving the young man something to grab. "Fuck!" Matthew screamed when the entire weight of his body rested just on the fingertips of his right hand. He could feel his tendons crying out in pain, ready to snap at any given moment. One last bit. Matthew screamed out in his soul, tensing his muscles as he swung his body to the side, reaching for the support with his other hand. Matthew released a long sigh when he finally managed to stabilize himself on the wall. His body was burning, exhausted beyond any measure. It was only a matter of time. But Matthew still managed to gather some remnants of his strength to pull himself up. Only when he safely sat on the window's ledge did Matthew breathe a sigh of relief. Yet, as he looked into the glass of the window, his feelings turned conflicted. On the one hand, he nearly turned desperate when seeing the monsters crawling all over the classroom he wanted to break into. Yet, as he caught up his own reflection in the window, Matthew couldn't help but swallow a gulp of salvia. Because now that he could see in his own reflection, Matt could see the same informative windows that he saw above Nadia before, now floating all over himself. Chapter 22 On the Edge. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. What the hell is this? Matthew muttered, looking at his reflection in the window. His face was as it always had been, maybe with the slight addition of the extreme exhaustion deep in his eyes. But what sparked the young man's interest flashed behind his reflection in a place he would never be able to normally see. Wives System Host, Name: Matthew Carrion, Age: 19, Level: 1-1, Race: Evolved Human, Class: System Holder, Status: Desperate, Matthew Carrion, Level: 1/1, Vitality: 13, Brawn: 13, Agility: 14, Mind: 0, Arcane: 0, Total: 20, Accumulated Levels: 1. It took Matt a short while to decipher all the words he could see in the window, given how distorted and reversed the image was. "Are those my stats?" Matthew asked, struggling to accept the reality before his eyes. It was simply easier to assume it was all just an illusion, a mirage of his tired mind. It was easier, even though Matthew was already well aware of the existence of his system. "No, I can't afford myself the luxury of not believing what I see," Matthew thought, gritting his teeth down. "But I can't expect too much from those stats either," he quickly noticed, his mood souring down. Scree, the zombies in the class finally took notice, turning their attention towards the weird shadow behind the window. Or maybe it was the noises that Matthew made that attracted them. It didn't matter. "I'm running out of time," Matthew thought, pulling out his sword and bracing himself against whatever he could find on the window sill. And then, while hoping for the best and praying to his sinful soul's delight, Matthew struck the window with the handle of his sword. But the pommel of his sword only bounced off the glass, sending Matthew's hand flying far outside of the frame of the window. And with the added weight of the sword pulling his hand down, the young man nearly lost his balance, something insanely precious when hanging for his dear life inside the narrowness of the window's edge. As expected of the school's windows, Matthew thought grimly, only to chuckle a little when he realized the actual benefit of this sort of construction. To think that the suicide prevention would stop the undead from claiming the lives of the alive, Matthew thought, his lips quivering as they formed a small, fake smile. There was nothing to be happy about in Matthew's situation. But he still decided to press himself for a smile. O.org. If all it took to keep up morale was forcing his body to act as if it was happy and relaxed, a small smile wouldn't be a high price to pay. But that doesn't solve the problem of getting inside, Matthew thought, looking around. He then grabbed the edge of the window's frame and leaned out as much as he safely could. No windows open, he muttered to himself, disappointed by the situation. At the current rate, getting back inside the building could prove to be a damn challenge. A thin panel of glass. That was too sturdy and bouncy for either side to break through it. I guess I'm stuck, Matthew muttered, only for the corner of his mouth to quiver as it formed a small smile. At least I don't have any stepbrothers or sisters to worry about, now, he added, trying to lift his spirits with this silly joke. And then, a miracle happened. Or maybe a disaster. One of the zombies, in its attempt to grab the shadowy silhouette on the other side of the window, pushed the window's handle down, allowing for the window to swing open. That's my chance, Matthew thought, raising his sword and just waiting. As the second the window opened up, several arms reached out to grab him. Slash. Cutting through flesh was easy, but the same couldn't be said about the bone. Or rather, it shouldn't be that easy to cut the bone. But Matthew's sword went through several zombies' arms as if they were made from butter. Did they rot away so quickly, or am I actually getting stronger? Matthew asked himself as he grabbed the edge of the open window and swung his sword inside, cutting right through the zombies gathered there. This was all that Matthew needed to do to fully agitate them. Their screeching increased in volume, and soon, the entire classroom filled with zombies to the brim, all eager to get that juicy bite out of Matthew's flesh. And then, with the path of the least resistance leading straight through the open window, zombies rushed towards Matthew. Only to fall right through the window, slowly clearing the classroom from the enemies. It makes me feel like a bully, Matthew muttered, squeezing as far into the corner of the window's ledge as he could. Yet, every now and then, the young man had to swing his sword. After all, with the number of zombies that constantly made their way to the window only to fall right through it, some of them were lucky enough to hook up or something and stay on the ledge. Roar! A powerful, animalistic scream came from below, shaking Matthew's laziness off. Even though he had no other choice but to wait for the classroom to clear before he could enter it, the roar reminded him that the clock was ticking. It was only a matter of time before the rampaging monster or monsters would damage the load-bearing wall of the building. I'm no architect, Matthew thought, watching how the zombies in the classroom neared the state where he would have a shot at barging inside. But if the load-bearing walls go down, it will be only a matter of whether a single wing will collapse or if the entire building will go down at once, Matthew thought grimly. And then, seeing an opportunity, he grabbed the vertical edge of the window's frame and, using it as a sort of swing, he jumped into the classroom, kneeing the two zombies that were attempting to catch him in the process. In an instant, zombies inside got even more energetic than before, their prey now right before their rotting hands. Matthew pulled out his axe and looked up at the zombies swarming the place. I need to clean this place quickly, he thought, swinging his heavier weapon and crushing the nearest zombie's skull with the blade's butt. There is no telling how long this building will keep on standing. Chapter 23 Fighting Smart. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Matthew continued to massacre all the zombies in the classroom for a while. Thankfully, as no monster made its way to the floor, clearing this one room up took the young man only a short while. I would love to pick up the cores now, Matthew thought, only to shake his head as he reprimanded himself. But it doesn't look like I have the time for that, he thought when yet another roar filled the building. With all the zombies in the classroom gone, Matthew slowly approached the doors before carefully opening them up. And just like one could expect from a time after a horde, the corridor was full of even more of the zombies. At a time like this, I regret entering such a massive school, Matthew thought, keeping his complaints to the inner voice of his soul. Yet, as much as he didn't like to move right back into fighting, he hardly had any other choice. I guess climbing through the outer wall is out of the question, Matthew thought, taking one last look at the outer wall of the classroom decorated with the windows. He already went through the adrenaline spike of having the only support for his body fail. And rather than resting his fate in the professionalism of the people that installed the drain pipes, Matthew decided to be the lord of his own fate. Wait, what about the floor? Matthew suddenly realized one of the vital points to consider when following through with his plan. And a single glance down proved that his hopes from earlier turned out to be correct. The floor in this wing of the building didn't suffer as much damage as the other floors. Still, a considerable portion of it was already gone, along with similarly dot-sized segments of the floor on the levels below. But there was one more important point about the way in which the floor collapsed on this particular level. Save for a narrow path, it's nearly impossible to access the back door to the classroom, Matthew noticed, only for a wide smile to appear on his lips as a plan hatched in his mind. He then quickly retreated from the main doors of the classroom. The young man then approached the reinforced doors leading towards the teacher's shed attached to the classroom. Breaking it will surely cause a lot of noise, Matthew realized. He then took a deep breath and placed his axe down before getting to work. Yet, rather than trying to force the door to the shed open, Matthew started to move the chairs and tables from the classroom towards its main doors, all in an attempt to properly barricade it. That should be enough, Matthew muttered with satisfaction when the pile of school equipment grew high enough to even cover the window within the classroom's doors. Obviously, while working on his barricade, Matthew couldn't avoid making quite a bit of noise. As such, roughly by the time he was only halfway done with the barricade, the zombies outside had already started to test their resiliency. Well then, on to the main task, Matthew muttered, grabbing the axe he left by the wall before as he approached the teacher's shed doors. Yet, right as Matthew raised his weapon and was about to bring it down on the reinforced material the doors were made from. "Stop it," a voice came out from the other side, only for the doors to suddenly open. "Ha!" Matthew muttered, instantly taking a position that would allow him to fight or flee, depending on the situation. Yet, instead of zombies or even monsters awaiting inside, he saw a pair of two girls, both of which belonged to a parallel class. He never had much opportunity to talk with them, spare for some occasional events or school-wide tournaments. Yet, the look of relief on the girls' faces when they noticed Matt lowering his weapon was real. At the very least, they do not consider me to be a threat, Matthew thought, resting his back against the wall as he looked at the girls. "I'm sorry, but I need to use this shed," he announced. "This is our hiding spot," they protested, although weakly with the fear still filling their minds. "Find one for yourself," the girl on the left shouted, only to shrink down when the screeching of the zombies intensified. But that was enough for Matthew to lose all the sympathy he had for the survivors. "I'm not here to hide," he announced before shaking the axe in his head to remind the girls that he was the one with a weapon here. "You can either leave on your own, or I will drag you out," he then threatened while squinting his eyes. "It's better if we move," the other of the girls whispered, desperately tugging at her friend's sleeve. Out of the two of them, one appeared to be confrontational, while the other was meek enough for Matthew not to be bothered with her. "Are you for real?" the more aggressive of the girls moaned at the attempt of her friend, only to squint her eyes and look at Matthew with clear hostility. "There is no way he will dare to." Before the girl could finish her sentence, Matthew took a step forward. He held his axe with his right hand, so he reached out with his left hand and grabbed the girl's long and silky blonde hair before pulling at it without any mercy. "Argh!" the girl screamed out in pain, not prepared for Matthew's decisiveness. I will go," she then quickly changed her narration, unable to contest Matthew in terms of strength. But the young man paid her cries no mind. He simply forced her out of the shed before throwing her on the ground of the classroom. Yet, as he looked back into the small shed, the other girl quickly raised her hands in a sign of surrender. "I will leave on my own, I'm sorry," she said in a shaky voice, terrified to the point of wetting the floor below her. "Do I really look that scary?" Matthew asked himself out loud, only to shake his head and allow the girl to pass by him. He then approached the outer doors of the shed. Due to the floor collapsing, zombies couldn't really reach this place, saving the girls from certain death. After all, the doors on the outer side of the shed were of the cheapest kind, almost as if the school intended to trap cheeky students if any of them dared to enter that place. Yet, Rather than contemplating the history of the shed or its intended purpose, Matt simply kicked the doors open, grabbed the edge of the door's frame, and then swung his axe, hitting its butt right against the wall of the corridor. "Hey!" he shouted, instantly attracting the zombies still trying to go through the main classroom doors. "Over here." That was all it took to attract the attention of the undead. And just like Matt hoped, as soon as the zombies rushed to attack him, they started to fall off the edge of the collapsed floor, allowing him to clear the corridor without actually risking his skin to do so. Chapter 24 Matthew's Dilemma. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. "That should be enough," Matthew muttered when most of the zombies from the corridor ended up falling down to the level below. Some of them were unlucky enough to fall even further, yet only a few of them fell on their heads, saving Matthew from the burden of killing them in the future. Matthew raised his eyes and looked towards the corridor. Given how he attempted to attract the zombies' attention only once, there were several stragglers that either didn't notice it or already forgot about his presence. A few stragglers that Matthew would have no problem taking down. "Are you done now?" the more aggressive of the girls shouted. "Shut up," the other of the girls surprisingly spoke up, making Matthew doubt whether she was really as meek as she appeared to be before. "Can't you see that he cleared them out?" she pointed out with her hand at the doors, only to shake her head and look towards the young man. "I know we didn't start on the best foot, but I'm Layla," the girl introduced herself, only to bow gently. Yet, as her outfit was pretty far removed from the rules the school implemented, even a simple bow like that exposed quite a bit of her cleavage. "I guess that's only to be expected from the popular girls," Matthew thought, glancing at the treat only to shake his head and then turn himself around. Just a few hours ago, he would be in seven heavens by getting attention from those girls. Yet right now, they were nothing more but unnecessary distraction. "Nice to meet you," Matthew said as he fixed his hold over his weapons and approached the doors. "And good luck," he added, ready to open the doors and continue with his mission. "Wait for a second, please," Layla called out, her voice revealing just how shocked she was with Matthew's pretty limited reaction. "You won't leave us here like that, won't you?" she asked, her hands grabbing the bottom of her shirt as she sneakily attempted to make it tense and thus reveal the shape of her charms. "He won't help us," the other girl added grumpily, only to bring her hands up and start unbuttoning her shirt. "He is just like all the other men. If we are of no use for him," she said, taking her shirt off, "then he won't bother with us at all." Matthew threw only a single look at the now nearly half-naked girl before rolling his eyes, shaking his head, and pushing the doors open. In the past, that offer might catch my interest, the young man thought. But now, I have a damned wife. Wait. Just before Matthew could press the doors open, Layla rushed forward, grabbing his other arm and wrapping herself around it. "We will do anything," she shouted, trying to pull Matt away from the doors. "So don't leave us," she added, raising her head and showcasing how teary her eyes were. "Please. I have a wife," Matthew thought, trying to ignore the pleasant feeling of one of the school beauties pressing her chest against his arm. "I have a damned wife," he repeated, trying to ignore the pleasure of having a cute girl like that beg him. "Let go of me," Matthew finally managed to utter those words. Yet, right as he was about to attempt wrestling his hand off the girl's grasp, Layla's friend approached him from the side and wrapped her arms around his chest. "I can feel it," Matthew thought when 2 points of heat appeared on his back. "I will let you fuck me if you protect us," she whispered directly into Matthew's ear. There was a massive difference between teasing him with cleavage or pushing their breast against his arm and voicing out the actual possibility of the deed. And being the virgin he was, Matthew couldn't help but hesitate. "Nadia would hate me for it," he thought, trying his utmost to resist the temptation. Even though he went through the hell of apocalypse before, he was still a young man, only a few months into his legal age. And while the earlier tease wasn't enough to stop him in his tracks, the open and outright offer of losing his V.card. "Not interested," Matthew said, wrestling his hand free from Layla's hold only to raise his hands, grab the arms of Layla's friend, and then pry them open. Then, before his hesitation could once again make him stop, Matthew opened the doors and moved forward. "Stop!" Layla cried out, rushing up to grab him again. "You can fuck us both," she screamed, not even realizing she attracted the attention of the few zombies that remained. "We will do whatever you want, suck you off, let you fuck us, even anal," she spoke in an extremely fast manner, throwing more and more incentives in her desperate attempt to lure Matthew into the honey trap. Damn it, Matthew bit his lips to the point where they started to bleed. The gentle yet sharp pain that followed helped the young man to clear his mind. "Get off me," he ordered, shoving the girl aside. The noise of approaching zombies was the last medicine that Matthew needed to force the lewd thoughts aside and focus on the important matters. And so, with neither of the girls holding him back anymore, he pushed forward, right towards the approaching zombies. A single step outside of the classroom was all that Matthew needed. With the undead in sight, the girls simply didn't dare to chase him outside. "You only live once, man." Matthew rushed towards the zombies, readying his axe for a swing. "There is no telling if I will even be able to return to Nida," he continued to think, his thoughts inadvertently turning into a search for an excuse that would allow him to forget about his morals. And then, right as Matthew swung his axe and decapitated the nearest of the zombies, he froze in place. "Wait a second," he thought, looking down as he brought his sword. Carrying left hand down, splitting another zombie's head into two. "My system is called the Wives system," he thought, recalling what he saw in the window's reflection before. Not wife system. Most of the zombies were long gone from the corridor, stuck on the floors below. As such, clearing out the remaining few didn't pose any challenge for Matthew at all. But one thing had changed between the moment he moved out of the classroom and when he finished the job. "I'm going to fight a damned monster," Matthew thought, perfectly aware that he was now just looking for the last push that would bring him into the sweet embrace of two beauties. Isn't it only right to have some fun before that? With no more threats present in the corridor, Matthew turned around and looked at the classroom right by the edge of the collapsed floor. And this might help me to discover a bit more about my system. Chapter 25 Naked Protest. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Matthew pushed the doors open. And to his surprise, there wasn't any resistance blocking him from doing so. Are they stupid or what? Matthew asked himself, shaking his head as he entered the room. If they wanted to stay here, barricading themselves is a no-brainer. And as he stepped inside, Matt realized that the girls did nothing to block the doors whatsoever. So it's not like they were trying to prepare for setting up the barricade either, he thought, unable to stop his head from shaking. Yet, the girls weren't in the classroom. No matter how much Matthew looked around, they didn't appear to be anywhere inside. As such, there was only one place where the two of them could be. Am I really sure that's what I should do? He thought, unable to stop himself from hesitating. And then, he looked at his system once again. And just like before, the name remained the same. Wives System Host, Name: Matthew Carrion, Age 19, Level 1-1, Race Evolved Human, Class System Holder, Status Desperate, Matthew Carrion, Level 1-1, Vitality 13, Brawn 13, Agility 14, Mind 0, Arcane 0, Total 20, Accumulated Levels 1, A/N, added this line 2 chapters behind. I forgot about it, sorry for that. It's a wives system after all, Matthew thought, releasing a deep sigh before finally making use of his hand and knocking on the doors. So you came back, the girl whose name Matthew still didn't know uttered, opening the door right in his face. Yet, what was the most shocking about her appearance, was how she no longer had any clothes on herself. What is the meaning of this? Matthew asked while squinting his eyes and refusing to look anywhere but at the girl's face. You are just a man. The girl shook her shoulders in clear contempt for the young man. Given a free booty call, how could you refuse? She asked before bringing her arms together and crossing them below her bust only to accent its size as she then shook her arms. Due to the movement, Matthew made the mistake of looking toward it. Yet, rather than throwing himself at the girl like a wild animal, he simply rolled his eyes, reached out, and pushed the girl aside. "Ha!" Layla muttered when she noticed Matthew's actions. "Could it be that I'm the one to your liking?" she asked while sitting down in the very corner of the shed. "What I need and what I want has nothing to do with fucking either of you," Matthew replied. Despite his earlier decision to take the booty call and enjoy himself before going to what would likely be his death, when faced with those two girls. For some reason, Matthew just couldn't press the issue. Even with the other of the two girls standing stark naked behind him. "Your friend should learn some shame, you know," he muttered before looking at a piece of glass in the outer doors to the shed in hopes of finding some clues about his system. Yet, outside of the things he saw before, no new clues appeared to float above the young man's reflection. "What do you want, then?" Layla asked, a look of confusion mixing with some sort of disappointment on her face. Matthew kneeled down in order to get his eyes on the same level as the Laylas. "First off, the most important question. You want me to protect you from the zombies because you have no means of fighting them off," Matt stated before swallowing his saliva as he gathered the courage. "But what if I could offer you the strength to fight them? From the looks of things, whoever I make into my wife, will receive system blessing as well," Matthew thought, waiting anxiously for Layla's answer. "Do you mean you want me to fight alongside you?" Layla finally composed herself enough to push the topic ahead. "Well, that all rides on a certain gamble," Matthew admitted while shrugging his shoulders only to then nod his head. "But yeah. That's the gist of it," he added. Layla lowered her head. She then raised her hand to her mouth and put her thumb between her lips, sucking on it as she thought. She then released a heavy sigh before raising her deep, blue eyes at Matthew. "It sounds better than just waiting here to starve," she added. "Layla," the other girl protested, unable to hold herself back any longer. "He is just going to use you as meat shield." "You don't sound very convincing when you showcase your nudity for all to see," Matthew commented, rolling his eyes. "Anyway, back on the topic. What I need you to do, right now, is just vocally accept everything I say," he explained before raising up only to fall down on one knee. "Layla, will you be my wife?" Chapter 26 Pushing the System's Limits. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The girl shrugged when hearing Matthew's question. First, she took a long, deep look at the young man's face as if trying to assess whether he was serious or just joking. She then glanced over at her naked friend by the side only to avert her eyes as if she was scared by her companion. "Are you for real?" Layla finally asked, unable to believe Matthew was actually serious. "What did I say you need to do?" Matthew asked, rolling his eyes. I can't really blame her, he thought, perfectly aware of the thoughts that could travel through Layla's head. Marrying someone was a big deal. Yet, bringing such an obscure and uncommon topic right in the middle of an apocalypse, after claiming he could give her strength. "Just accept everything," Layla replied without much of a thought. "Then, let's repeat," Matthew ordered before taking a deep breath. "Layla, will you be my wife?" His voice befitted the grandiose of the occasion, even if it was all just a blind shot aimed at exploiting his system. "Yes, I will," the girl replied obediently, although her voice betrayed how unwilling she was in reality. Did it work? Matthew thought, looking around the girl in hopes of seeing the status window appear. But nothing happened. "That's strange," the young man muttered, lowering his eyes and ignoring the two baffled girls around him. "It worked the last time," Matthew muttered to himself, trying to figure out what the hell did go wrong. Is it her unwillingness? He attempted to guess, refusing to just give up on the spot. The possibility of gaining another wife was something that Matthew couldn't ignore. His first attempt at surviving the apocalypse already proved how insanely powerful one's system could be. As long as the system owner had a clue how to use it, that is. Back then, the name of the system was self-explanatory, Matthew thought, reminiscing the not so far off past. Why can't this be the same with my current system? He then asked himself, raising his eyes towards the ceiling of the shed as if he wanted to somehow reach the heavens with his question. Or wait, maybe it is self-explanatory. Matthew suddenly thought, despite already following this line of thought before. What does it mean to be someone's wife? Matthew voiced out without even realizing that his lips parted open. Ha! Layla's friend groaned aggressively, unable to take Matthew's shit any longer. Fuck you and your wife's fantasies, she exclaimed, raising her hand as if to slap Matthew. Only to then lower it back along her waist when the girl's eyes fell on the weapons still ready in Matthew's hands. Daria, calm down, Layla urged her companion, tones of panic appearing in her voice. To them, I must appear like some sort of madman, Matthew thought, scanning the room and the two girls inside with his eyes before returning to his analysis of the situation. He then raised his eyes and looked Layla directly into hers. What does it mean to be someone's wife? This was the one question that Matthew absolutely had to find the answer to. Back in his original walkthrough of the apocalypse, his system was all about sacrifice. Right now, his system was all about getting wives. As such, the meaning of being someone's wife was the obvious solution to Matthew's current problem. Maybe going exclusive. Daria barked, although she proposed a valid idea. What, are the two of them together or what? Matthew thought, surprised by how Layla's short request managed to calm her friend down nearly instantly. I think we can go with that, Matthew said as he nodded his head before turning his eyes toward still naked Daria. Are the two of you together or something? The air in the room turned so tense that one could hang a damned painting in the middle without the piece of art falling to the ground. It turned into a soup that Matthew had to exert quite a lot of strength to move through. Yes, Layla answered decisively, not letting Daria utter another word of insult towards Matthew. Okay, Matthew nodded his head, unable to be bothered with a silly emotion like a surprise. Say out loud that you two are breaking up, Matthew ordered, eager to test this new idea out. Daria, we are breaking up, Layla was quick to follow Matthew's order despite how ridiculous it was. The look of worry on the girl's face mixed with a quick glance that she sent towards her companion hinted at the reason why she was so willing to follow Matthew's orders. Okay, then let's try again, Matthew said as he nodded his head. Layla, will you be my wife? As the young man posed his question, his hands inadvertently tightened over the handles of his weapons to the point the whites of his bones showed underneath the skin of his knuckles. If that's not it, Matthew thought, feeling inwardly forced to put a time limit on how long he could try to meddle with his system. Because they were hidden in the shed right now, the roars of the monster from the bottom floor turned into background noise. A background noise that one could barely hear, but that constantly reminded the young man of the time limit set for the entire building. I'm willing, Layla nodded her head with a look of determination behind her eyes. Matthew looked around the girl again, and then bit his lips to the point they oozed blood. Damn, the young man shook his head, sobered up by the sudden bout of pain in his mouth. At this rate, I will eat my lips before achieving anything, he complained in his mind, refusing to allow his state of mind influence the morale of the girls. Whether he would succeed at forcing the system to attach to Layla or not didn't matter in the long run. If it happened, it would be a great bonus. Yet, as it was something Matthew didn't plan at all, the failure would simply mean returning to the original plan. Still, by keeping the morale of the girls high, or at least not any lower than it already was, Matthew could still hope for his attempts to proceed relatively smoothly. It still didn't work, he whispered, more to himself, to release the pent-up frustration of the constant failures rather than to hint at something to his temporary companions. Maybe it's all about dedication and honesty. Matthew attempted another blind shot. He then raised his eyes at Layla before biting his lips for the third time in short succession. You love your friend, don't you? Matthew asked in a small voice as if he was sharing some sort of secret rumor that no other soul could hear. I do, Layla nodded her head without even a hint of hesitation. Matthew closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and looked directly into Layla's face. Then, if you want me to save her, or actually the two of you, I need you to honestly break up with her and submit yourself to me as my second wife, Matthew stated, dropping the bomb on the girls. He didn't want to do it. Even though he couldn't really understand how two girls could be into each other, he wasn't one to judge or even care. Yet, whatever kind of love it was, from the determination in Layla's eyes alone, Matthew could tell that it was real. That's why, despite his request being Matthew's last attempt at forcing the system to act, he couldn't help but feel a spear of guilt penetrate his heart the second he uttered his words. Layla attempted to say something, only for Dara to suddenly rush forward and send a slap right into Matthew's face. Clearly aware of what he did, Matthew didn't even attempt to dodge. Instead, he simply stood up and turned his eyes towards Daria. "I don't care what you are planning," she shouted, grabbing the edge of Matthew's pants down and pulling them down before the young man could even react. "But you wanted to fuck us, right?" she uttered, still using the moment where Matthew was too shocked to do anything. She then raised her hands back up and reached out for Matthew's flaccid manhood. Her fingertips touched the skin of Matthews Jr., sending an instant snap of electricity up his spine. And then, Matthew's vision blurred. And when it returned to its usual state, several windows floated all over both of the girls. Chapter 27 They wiggle nicely. You are listening at novelfull.audio. "Get off!" Matthew barked, slapping down at Daria's hand before leaning forward and pulling his pants back up. Now that the system finally reacted, there was no reason whatsoever for him to keep up with this charade. "Ha!" Daria uttered a weird cry, mixing both surprise, pain, and anger. "The heck do you want, then?" But Matthew didn't reply. Instead, he took a quick look at the status window that floated directly between the two girls. Wife number 2, name: Layla Hussain / Daria Paternal, age 19/19, level 1-1, race human/human, class nun/seductress, status confused/shocked plus embarrassed. What the hell? Matthew thought, confused to the end of his wits. Why are the two of them considered a single wife? He asked himself, only to shake his head. What's important is that it worked, Matthew then muttered, his thoughts slipping through his lips. "Ha!" Layla uttered a small moan of surprise when she heard Matthew's words. "What worked?" she asked, pulling herself up from the floor and taking a long, inquisitive look at Matthew's face. "It's easier to show than it is to tell," Matthew muttered in response as his eyes moved towards the second half transparent window that he could see between the girls. System alert: host can donate the accumulated levels, pick a wife to donate levels. The intention of this window was clear, and it finally explained the one line of Matthew's own system that he couldn't understand. Just to be sure, Matthew thought, ignoring both of the girls as he scrambled around the room to find something reflective. And just like before, a single glance at the window embedded into the outer doors of the shed was enough to confirm his doubts. Matthew Carrion, level 1/1, vitality 13, brawn 13, agility 14, mind 0, arcane 0, total 20, accumulated levels 1. Not a single of my stats increased, despite how I killed quite a few zombies on this floor, Matthew noticed, only for his eyes to move over to the bottommost line of his own status. For a moment, he simply stared at the words visible in his reflection. And then, he turned his head back toward the girls. "I'm pretty confused about what the hell is going on myself," Matthew announced to the dismay of the girls. "But at the very least, we did something good," he claimed before putting his hands on his hips and looking at the girls with his eyes squinted a little. "Now then, I'm not sure how exactly it will work, so I need you two to decide who wants to fight," Matthew claimed before crossing his arms on his chest and turning silent. "I will," Layla was quick to react, raising her hand along with speaking out. "If you are just trying to play along, then I have some bad news for you," Matthew warned as he shook his head. "This is as real as it gets. But if you are still sure, I will fight, Layla repeated, her eyes flashing with a spark of determination. Fine, Matthew nodded his head before turning around and moving back to the classroom. He then grabbed one of the nearby tables before putting it closer to the girls and looking up at Layla's face. Smash it with all your might, as if your life depended on it, he ordered before taking a step back to give the girl some room. What the fuck are you talking about? Daria flared up, tightening her hands into fists. Do you want her to break her hands or what? She asked in a confrontational tone, clearly unwilling to take Matthew's bullshit any longer. Right now, I'm showing you that I'm not just some crazy idiot, Matthew replied calmly before moving his eyes to Layla. Continue. It's fine, Layla threw towards her partner before taking one last look at the table. She then closed her eyes, screamed out, and smashed her fist down at the table. The unfortunate piece of furniture made a small noise when its structure came to a test. But in the end, Layla's attack turned out to be way too weak to do anything. Are you happy now? Layla asked, turning her face towards the young man while raising her hand to massage it with her other. In the end, smashing one's hand into a thick layer of laminated wood wasn't the most pleasurable experience. I need you to wait for a second, Matthew ordered before recalling all of the things he saw in the status windows. Layla Hussait, donate level, Matthew spoke out. The girl shrugged, not expecting Matthew to suddenly bring out her surname. Surname that the young man had no way of knowing. Not it, huh? Matthew muttered to himself when he confirmed that there was no change to the status of the girls. Maybe, Matthew muttered while rubbing his chin. Then, his eyes flashed up. Second wife, donate level, he spoke. Donation accepted. A single line of text appeared before Matthew's eyes only to disappear the very second he read through it. And when he took a glance at the status of the girls, he finally noticed some small change. Level 1/2, fuck, Matthew cussed under his nose before turning his eyes towards Daria. What, finally made up your mind? The girl asked, grabbing her own tits only to shake them. Yet, rather than looking at her plump bosom that half of the school's male populace would kill to get a single glance at, Matthew moved his eyes towards the girl's status again. Status. Confused/shocked plus extremely embarrassed, you actually never did it, did you? Matthew muttered, realizing the obvious conclusion to the equation of the girl's behavior and her state of mind revealed by her status. What? Daria froze, not expecting Matthew to suddenly say something like that. Either way, I fucked up, Matthew waved his hand to drop the former topic before admitting his fault. But is it safe to assume that the two of you have roughly the same level of strength, he then asked, still hoping to proceed with the showcase. No, Layla shook her head sideways, Daria was always stronger than me, she admitted, her cheeks turning red as she averted her eyes. But she still wouldn't be able to smash through the wood of the table, right? Matthew asked, quickly losing hope for his current plan. I happened to strike my desk in anger a few times. Daria somehow managed to rein in her anger when she noticed that Matthew's questions, despite being extremely weird, were strangely specific. In other words, his words didn't sound like the words of someone who had lost his mind and was just living his fantasies. Did you manage to break it? Matthew asked, drilling the same question as before. No, Daria replied shortly, cutting straight to the chase. Matthew then released a heavy sigh. And then, he turned around and pointed at the same desk that Layla had attempted to smash before. There was no need for words. Now that Daria realized Matthew wasn't some kind of horny animal, she was a bit more willing to at least see through his strange game. She then approached the desk, a look of hesitation appearing on her face. And just as she raised her hand to attempt smashing the desk, Matthew couldn't help but notice. They wiggle super nice, he thought, allowing his mind a tiny moment of respite, a short moment of rest from thinking about the coming fight, system, and the apocalypse in general. And then, Daria smashed her fists into the table, breaking it in half. Chapter 28 I will have you help me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What the hell, Daria uttered in shock, her eyes opening wide as her forehead covered in sweat. She stayed in the same position that she ended up in after the attack. And she simply continued to stand in place, staring down at the small amount of rubble she turned a school desk into. Daria then raised her head and looked directly at Matthew's face. "Lo, what did you do?" Her lips trembled when she voiced her question in a low voice. Her eyes widened even further than before. The small blush of shame that she so desperately tried to hide away has now disappeared. She knew it's not something she should be able to do, Matthew thought, only to breathe a sigh of relief. In the end, he didn't know how good donating a single level would be. The change could very well be super small, nowhere near enough to let the delicate hand of the girl split the hard wood of the desk in half. In a sense, it was a gamble. A gamble of whether or not a system's level could bring forth a noticeable change. From the looks of it, my gamble paid off, Matthew thought, his lips twitching a little. "I doubt you read enough novels to understand the concept of a system," Matthew said. He then shook his head. "To make it easy for you to understand, you can just assume that I can periodically make my wives stronger," he explained. "I know what systems are," Layla happily reported, eager to prove her use. "Wait for a second." Daria finally moved her body, raising her hand up like an obedient student in a class. The thing was, if a student were to sit completely naked, flashing their charms all over the place, hardly any teacher would pay them any attention. They would be too busy freaking out and calling for the principal and maybe even the police. "Wasn't Layla supposed to be your new wife?" Daria pointed out, showcasing how surprisingly calm her mind was. "What's going on?" she cried out, quickly proving that it wasn't necessarily the case. "Apparently," Matthew muttered, turning his eyes away. "My system classified both of you as my second wife," he admitted, averting his eyes even further. "What the hell does that mean?" Daria shouted out, clearly caring not about potentially attracting zombies towards this place. Matthew cleared out the corridor from all the stragglers, sure, but that didn't mean zombies couldn't access this place again. After all, the very reason why Matthew risked his life to get to this part of the compound was to reach a floor with its staircase still intact. "I know that you are troubled, but isn't it better than to just leave your fate in the hands of the zombies?" Matthew asked, moving his eyes from Layla over at Daria's face. "I don't recall leaving my fate to zombies," Daria countered, tightening her fists. "Is she considering attacking me?" Matthew thought, taking such a possibility into the equation. The girl just received a power-up. And from the state of her mind displayed by the system, all of her nudity-displaying act was nothing more but a desperate attempt to gain his protection. It wouldn't be surprising at all, Matthew summed up his chances. "Tell me, then," Matthew said out loud, raising his eyes on Daria's face. "Where would you get food to survive past the next few days?" Ultimately, survival boiled down to exactly the same needs that their caveman ancestors were troubled with. One could last only a few days without food. Without water, even less. And once the entire logistic chain that supplied the world would go down as one of the first victims of the apocalypse, procuring for those simple needs turned into a massive challenge for modern people. Daria attempted to speak up, only for her voice to end up stuck in her throat. She has no answer, Matthew noticed, keeping his face as still as possible. There was no need to let the girl know that he realized that. "We would somehow manage." Layla stood up and proclaimed. Her face was full of determination, her eyes sharply gazing down at Matthew. "What are you, a teacher, to stare at me like that?" Matthew asked. He then shook his head and lowered his eyes, his hand found refuge on his hips. "I know that between the apocalypse, zombies, and the situation right now, this is extremely confusing to you." For a moment, pity flashed in Matthew's eyes. "But it's all our new reality," Layla suddenly claimed, the doubt long gone from her eyes. "By hiding in that shed, we tried to cover in fear, we hoped," the girl hesitated before averting her eyes. "We hoped someone would come to save us. Layla took a step forward and raised her hands to the buttons of her shirt. Her fingers quickly solved the puzzle, leaving more and more of her impressive cleavage open. I don't really know how you can make us stronger. I know what a system means. Layla stopped for a moment. She turned her head away, hiding her blush. But I can't really accept that something like this can exist, the girl said, raising her eyes back at Matthew. And so her march resumed. And for every step she made, Layla took her shirt lower, to the point when she stood right in front of Matthew, she had nothing but her bra on. This is no longer necessary. Matthew took a step back. Now that he figured out the system a bit, he really wanted to take it easy for a while, especially with two so clearly willing girls. But the roars of the monsters, the roars that Matthew continued to stubbornly ignore. They were getting stronger. I can feel the entire building vibrate, Matthew realized when he took a moment to breathe. No, Matthew shook his head. He kept his eyes clear from wandering towards the surely glorious sight below, hooking them in Layla's pupils instead. What we need to do, right now, is to defeat the monsters at the bottom floor, he stated, using this notion to kill all the lust born in his body. You surely can spare a few moments to let us help you relax, Layla hummed, taking a step forward and throwing her arms around Matthew's neck. Her naked breasts flattened against the young man's chest, the sense of enticing warmth assaulting his mind. Actually, we can't, Matthew shook his head before grabbing Layla's shoulders and pushing her away. Once we ensure this building won't collapse on our heads, we can think about it, he added, taking a step back and turning around. And now that I know I can raise your strength, I will have you help me with that task. Chapter 29 Start of the job. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Can't we even take a moment to dress up? Daria spat through her teeth. Surely, it wouldn't take us that long. Her objection was pretty valid. She paraded through the blood-stained corridor but naked. Now that the situation has somewhat calmed down, she grew more and more aware of her exhibitionist tendencies. Yet, with only her long, dark hair to cover herself up with, Daria's wishes only made her look slightly adorable. Ha! Matthew suddenly froze for just a second. He then picked up the pace as if nothing had happened, but his attention was focused on something deep within. Did I just consider her cute? With the element of shocking seduction now out of the picture, Matthew managed to approach the situation with reason instead of instincts. How could I do that? Matthew lashed at himself in his thoughts while walking down the corridor. I really shouldn't let myself end in a situation like that again, he thought, furrowing his brows. When fighting zombies and monsters, the less stuff they can grab you by, the better. Matthew finally explained his reason why he kept the girls naked and half-naked. That's also why you should bind or even cut your hair, he added. In the apocalypse, there was no room for sentiments. Those girls could fancy their hairstyle, yet it was one of the worst traps for those with long hair. Because in the slugfest of fighting with the zombies, a single, well-aimed grab and the zombies would effectively eliminate the combatant. The blessing of not turning from just a single bite or scratch wouldn't matter much if a zombie were to simply snap one's neck off. But wouldn't clothes offer us some protection from the zombies? Layla pointed out, holding on to a table's leg that she improvised as her weapon. I mean, one scratch, and we are out, right? She suggested as if it was something obvious. You watch way too many movies. Matthew shook his head before refocusing himself on the mission. They lingered on the single floor for long enough. Now it was the time to solve the problem of those monster roars coming from below. Remember, they look awful, but they are slow, Matthew pointed out as they reached the intact staircase. It was also the first place where they finally encountered the zombies again. Lured by the constant small noises they made while hidden in the classrooms, zombies only needed time to find their way back to their floor. The same happened back to our fortress, Matthew thought, recalling the events from his first attempt at surviving this disaster. He then swung his fireman's axe down on a zombie's head. Normally, we would try to collect those stones, Matthew instructed, pointing at a shiny bit hidden within the brain matter of the zombie that he just downed. You! Daria protested, raising her hand to her mouth and turning her eyes away. The convulsion mixed with unsavory sounds that followed indicated what she was up to. If they are important, Layla proved to be somewhat cold-hearted, looking unperturbed at the corpse of her former classmate. Why are we not collecting them now? Matthew didn't reply. He turned unusually silent, focused on the approaching zombies instead. The staircase was still relatively empty, with only a few zombies reaching that far. But as they moved down, more and more of the deceased students started to appear. What do we do? Daria asked, clenching her jaws as she tightened her grasp over the sword. It was the weapon that Matthew bought from the merchant and now shared with the girl. She somehow ended up first to gain a level from Matthew's donation, so the young man deemed her more suitable to carry a proper weapon. Just inflict a heavy head trauma, Matthew instructed, swinging his axe again as they forced their way into the thicker crowd of the zombies. As they left the staircase behind, the girls slowly got used to the simplistic combat. The first day or two should be easy like that, Matthew thought, biting down on his lips. That's how the apocalypse played out in his memory. And yet, a damned monster had already threatened to destroy the school's foundation only a few hours since everything began. How could the events change so much? Matthew asked himself, steadily swinging his weapon to the sides and laying scores of his former schoolmates to their final rest. I'm the only one who changed, Matthew thought, only to bite even harder on his lips. In the end, clearing an entire floor out of zombies took the group roughly 20 minutes. Just like in Matthew's original life, as long as one was composed and determined, one could stop a wave of zombies all by themselves. We don't collect the stones because they are of no use to us, Matthew finally explained the question that Layla posed before they descended the stairs. For now, that is, he added, only to begin his march back towards the secondary staircase. Normally, those stones would become a commonplace currency for the survivors. The few trades that his group at the fortress did were all about exchanging those cores. And yet, Matthew felt no fear in leaving them to wait in the rotting flesh. Because due to his interference, only he and several soldiers managed to kill a zombie during the opening phase of the apocalypse. In other words, besides the few corpses resting beneath the pile of rubble, he was likely the only system holder in the entire school. In other words, in the entire school, Matthew currently held a monopoly over the usage of the stones. As such, they were of use only for him and those allied to him. Right, Layla nodded her head, gripping her worn-down metal rod in her hands. We are going to slay some monster, right, she added, cutely leaning her head to the side. That gesture would be quite cute, Matthew commented, throwing a quick look at the girl. That is if you didn't have blood all over your tits, he added before rolling his eyes and turning them back towards the staircase. Due to the commotion, zombies already started appearing, slowly crawling out from the floor below. We still have several floors to go through, Matthew announced, turning his eyes towards the two girls. Are you ready? He asked while scanning the changes on their status window. Wife number 2, name. Layla Hussait / Daria Paternal, age. 19/19, level. 2/4, class. Clubster / warrior, status. Aroused / determined, just a quick glance was enough for Matthew to gulp down his saliva. Over the course of them clearing the floor, Matthew received the notification that his level donation function became available. And without a second thought, he used it right on his wife number 2. Between the donation and her own growth, Daria managed to reach level 4th, while Layla ended up at a measly 2nd level. I wonder how strong they are right now, Matthew thought. He never got to experience levels or anything of that sort with his previous system. And now, he struggled to judge the meaning behind the information he could see. Still, they both gained an entire level just from this short fight, Matthew thought, before looking around, right as he neared the staircase. I wonder how did my own stats change, he thought before fixing his grip over the axe's handle and smashing it down on the nearest zombie. Chapter 30. This place is as good as any other. You're listening at NovelFull.audio. Are those my stats? Matthew stood still while turning a big shard of glass around to look into the details of his own progress. The first part of my status didn't seem to receive any major changes outside of the status of my mind. It simply changed from the desperate that I was before to the determined that I was right now. It was the other part of my status that picked up my interest. Matthew Carrion, level 1/1, vitality 16, brawn 17, agility 16, mind 0, arcane 0, total 49, accumulated levels 1/3, Matthew shrugged when he finally managed to decipher the details of his detailed status. Did I miss the notification, he thought, looking towards the bottom line. At this point it was pretty clear what this line was all about. With 2 levels donated and 1 yet to be distributed, Matthew thought before looking at the last number displayed in his reflection. The math does check out, he thought, gritting his teeth. In theory, he could give that level to Nadia to help with her recovery. And it was something that Matthew seriously considered, given how he didn't know where the time of his end would come. But ultimately, if he wanted the girl to survive, taking out that monster was the main concern. Because even if Nadia were to survive her current zombified status, she would then become just another victim of the crashed building. Matthew! Daria called out, desperately swinging down her sword. We would use some help here. They have only managed to clear a single floor so far. Right now, they were just a few steps away from the staircase, digging into the mass of zombies on the floor below. But contrary to the previous instance, this floor turned out to be far harder. Not because the zombies received some mysterious and magically inconvenient power. Up. It was all because of their number. And now, the young man and his 2 naked companions had to now deal with the problem they ignored earlier. Seriously, help. Lila cried out when 3 zombies threw themselves at her. And even with her raised level, she could hardly stave off their combined attacks. Matthew shook his head, forcing himself out of his daze. Whenever anything related to his system would come up, he would freeze to think it over. After all, it was his greatest asset and greatest tool to survive in the apocalypse. But checking his own status and then trying to modify his strategy, was an activity that required a fitting place and time. And due to the mass of zombies pressing toward them, the 2 poor girls couldn't give Matt the window of opportunity to calmly think about his system. Got it, he called out in response, taking a wide swing of his axe before throwing its butt directly into the crowd of zombies ahead. The roads are getting stronger, Matthew thought as he immersed himself in the heat of the battle. Host can now donate a level. A vision flashed in the corner of Matthew's eyes, indicating that just a few moments of fighting were enough to bring his level up a notch. Or rather, to give him the chance to donate his level again. I need a moment. Matthew called out after thinning out the crowd of the zombies a little before leaving the rest to the girls. He picked up another stray shard of glass and took a quick look at his own status again. Just like I thought, he muttered under his breath, clasping his teeth together. Even though Matthew clearly reached a new level, his level count on the main status screen failed to move. Am I going to end up as a forever. Level 0.1 character? Matthew thought, gritting his teeth against each other before raising his hand and slapping his own cheek. He then shook his head to distract himself from the downsides of his system. I wish to donate 2 levels to wife number 2. Matthew called out, ignoring the shame of uttering such words in public. Donation accepted, a message appeared before his eyes, prompting the young man to drop the shard of glass and rejoin the fight. Thankfully, be it thanks to their raised levels or maybe Matt's own progress, they managed to clear the floor without much trouble. Sure, the corridor crowded with zombies wasn't the place Matthew would like to be, but he didn't really have much choice. The building is really shaking, Daria observed as their small group turned around and headed for the staircase again. She then raised her eyes and looked toward Matthew's face. So you weren't lying about those monsters, she muttered in a silent voice, as if too ashamed to admit Matthew was right. So it is, Matthew replied impassively before taking a deep breath. We only have 3 more floors to go, he said before glancing over at the girls. Spare for his donation, Layla managed to raise her level by 1. Thanks to that, they now reached 4th and 5th levels, giving Matthew some hopes regarding the coming fight. We better hurry up, then, Layla summed up, only to take a look at the worn-out piece of metal she was using as the weapon all this time. It would be nice to get something better to swing, too, she added before sending a strange look at Matthew's face. Thinking about this place is as good as any, he muttered under his nose, only to shake his head and turn around. Okay, girls, full stop, he ordered as he lowered his axe. Layla, you are responsible for gathering as many cores, Matthew cleared his thought, as much of those shiny stones as you can. Daria, the young man turned his head to the other girl. I need you to guard the staircase. Don't let any zombies near, he instructed. Matthew then took a step back and looked at the bloodied corridor. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to picture their location on a model scale of the entire compound. This place is really as good as any other, he thought before opening his eyes and looking at the girls with a mysterious ray flashing behind his eyes. We are going to summon a merchant.